Okay, today we are going to be analyzing a visual text, comparison and contrast. The lesson will be in 3 parts. This is part 1 with visual 1. And the lesson begins with 2 visual images, one from the Great Depression and one from the Dust Bowl. I chose these 2 images because the first novel we will be reading in 9th grade English is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and the story is set during the Great Depression. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a backdrop of the story. In Lesson 1, we are analyzing the Great Depression, and in Lesson 2, we're going to analyze the Dust Bowl. When analyzing a visual text, one of the first things that you need to do is consider the details in the image. Look from corner to corner, but then look deeper. Look all the way into the picture at all of the details that you see, which would mean looking at the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives, and the adverbs. First of all, the noun that I see is the children. As I look closer, I see that these children are holding signs. There's a man standing behind the children, and I notice that it is a sunshiny day. Now, when I look closer at the signs being held by the children, I notice that it says, "Rorig's kid doesn't starve. Why should we?" So, to describe that, I think of hunger. And then on this sign, I notice that it says, "Why can't you give my dad a job?" Therefore, the detail or description I see here is unemployment. I notice that this child is squinting, but she also looks like she is looking with curiosity. So I said squinting curiously. I notice that the man in the background is standing as if to guard the children, or even maybe goad the children, which would be to encourage them to picket for them. And then I notice that they're appealing peacefully. They're not appearing to be breaking any laws. They're just standing there peacefully. And the reason I say appealing is because they are obviously trying to get Rorig and his company to take notice. And I found that these 2 boys seem to be looking confusedly. The next thing to consider when you're looking at a visual image is the labels. Are there any labels in the image? And after reading the signs, I noticed that there's a label of wealthy. It appears that Rorig is wealthy while this dad is poor. So that would be the label. And then I noticed that it says starve. So one of the labels that I would give would be hungry. These are obviously children, so I labeled that children. And then since this boy is holding a sign that says dad, I assume there's a family involved. Dad doesn't have a job, so the label I would give that would be unemployed. On the next slide, it's asking us to think about the audience. Who was the intended audience? Now, when a writer writes a story, he has a specific audience in mind. When a photographer takes a picture, he also has a specific audience in mind. So that's what it's asking us to think about. Who took this picture, and what was his intended audience? Well, I believe that probably Rorig was an intended audience member, maybe just to get across to him what was happening in front of his workplace. And then beyond that, I think that it would probably be Rorig's company, the people who own the company where these children are picketing. Also, it could have been the audience of the government to maybe get the government to step in and help with these jobs. And then lastly, maybe it was just simply the public. Maybe this was a newspaper photo. In order to decide your audience, if you don't directly know, you have to make some assumptions. So some of the assumptions that I made to draw the conclusion of Roerig, Roerig's company, government, and public is I assume that possibly Roerig is a boss or an owner of this company because he's obviously still working while this man is not. I also assumed that the photo was possibly for a newspaper article. I don't think it would have been for television in this time, but I did assume that possibly this was a newspaper reporter taking the photo. Now, the next thing that you consider when you're thinking about a visual text is precedent. What came before this that caused these events? So from our history, we know that the precedent would be the Great Depression, because I told you that at the beginning, that this was set during the Great Depression, which was also World War II. Therefore, the effect of the Great Depression and the effect of World War II caused hunger, according to these signs, which is starvation. It caused unemployment for this dad. And strife and division between Roerig and his company and the general workers like this dad. Shared values. When a photo like this is taken, the photographer is trying to appeal to you, the viewer, or to his audience. And he's appealing to what would be considered shared values, things that we can look at and relate to because they are the same in our own lives. So some of the shared values in this photo could be family. Most Americans, are a part of some form of family, and I see that this is children and then dad. So that's a shared value. Another shared value in the photo is work. In most American households, at least one person in the home has a job, so that would be a shared value, working ethic. And then another shared value is that on one side we may share the wealth, or on the other side we may be in the poverty, which would be also shared values. And that's how the photographer is trying to appeal. He's either appealing to the wealthy over here to get them to be sympathetic, or appealing to the poverty over here to show that you're not alone. Comparisons being made in the photo. In this photo, some of the comparisons being made are Roerig versus this dad, and then also Roerig's kid versus these kids. It is wealthy versus poor. What is the purpose? Why did this photographer take this photo? Just like a photographer who comes to the school to take school photos, there's a purpose. What was his purpose for doing this? And you do have to make some assumptions. Possibly the purpose was to show the discrimination in the workforce during the Great Depression. Or maybe it was to remind the public of the inequality between the wealthy and the poor. Or maybe it was to appeal to the government to end unemployment. And then from that purpose, think, what can I assert about this photo? Write an assertion about the photo. For example, the purpose of this image is to show the business owner that he is being unfair to his regular employees. Or, the purpose of this image is to remind the public that there is inequality between the wealthy and the poor. Or, the purpose of this image is to appeal to the government to end unemployment so that it will stop causing the starvation of children. And with those things in mind, using your assertion, you would begin your essay in which you show how the photographer appealed to one of these audiences, either the business owners or the public or the government. And that would be the basis of your argument essay on analyzing a visual text. And this concludes part 1 of our lesson. In part 2, we're going to look at a second image and then compare the two.